The Works was a CGI movie that was being developed on between 1979 and 1986. It's notable that if the film was fully completed, then it would have made it the first full-length CGI movie predating Toy Story shy to a decade. The plot of the film was about a giant supercomputer called The Works, who started the events of World War III, wiping out nearly all of the humans. In the aftermath, the Works tries to rebuild humanity by repopulating the planet with robots. The last surviving humans are surviving not on Earth but in the asteroid belt. T-Square, a young human lady, plans to lead a resistance to take back the Earth. The script is available to read, although it's worth noting that the storyline was never finalized during its development. The movie was being worked on at the Computer Graphic Lab at NYIT. Initially they were working on technology to help make traditional animation digital, but after some time they began investing in CGI and produced The Works to demonstrate on what the software could do for the entertainment industry, although ultimately the film was unfinished and it's not known as to how much of it was completed. Wolfman vs Godzilla was an unfinished fan film, where despite being unofficial, it actually used professionally made suits for its production. There are actually two versions of the film. The first one was made back in 1979, where the Godzilla costume was based on the one that was seen in Godzilla vs Mothra, and additionally joining the fight was Baragon. Only the effects scenes were filmed, which was about 36 minutes worth of footage, and then in 1981, with the release of other werewolf movies such as The Howling and American Werewolf in London, inspired the Japanese team to remake the movie, this time additionally filming scenes with humans, getting the opportunity to make a werewolf transformation scene. And the newer Godzilla costume was inspired by the one that was seen in King Kong vs Godzilla. Work went on until the mid-1980s, although due to complications, the movie was never completed as intended. For decades in the Western region, there was a lot that was unknown about the production. It wouldn't be until about the 2010s that more came to light. A great variety of photographs and even several clips and behind the scenes footage found their way to the internet, although everything that has been completed of the film has not yet been made publicly accessible. In 1933, RKO Pictures released a horror film called The Monkeys Paw, based on the short story by the same name, where the object, a decapitated monkey paw, has the ability to grant free wishes, although with dire consequences. The movie featured some snazzy effects such as the monkey's paw moving on its own by using stop motion. However, when the movie was reissued years later, there were censor cuts that were made, which sadly removed the stop motion scene. Today, only the French dub is known to exist, with the English version being lost. A Daughter of the Gods is a 1916 film about a sultan who asks a witch if she's able to resurrect his deceased daughter. The witch agrees to, but under the condition that the sultan kills a goddess, which the whole experience makes him extremely conflicted. The film is historically notable for being one of the first movies to feature a major actress within a nude scene. However, today the film is sadly lost. It was reported that the BFI did hold a few feet of film. However, unfortunately they were misplaced and end up getting lost. The Legend of King Kong was an unmade Universal picture, which would have been a straight remake of the 1933 King Kong movie. Initially, Universal was in negotiation with RKO Pictures to produce the film, but shortly afterwards, RKO had completed a contract agreement with Paramount Pictures for the Kong movie license. However, Universal had noted that the Kong novelization that was made to coincide with the original film had elapsed into the public domain, so Universal Studios set plans to adapt the book, and planned to rush pre-production in the hopes to pressurize RKO to side with them. After a very lengthy and complicated courtroom case, it would be Paramount Pictures to produce the Kong remake of the 70s, and Universal wouldn't have a chance to make their own version not until about 30 years later. later, small bits of test footage was made for The Legend of King Kong. However, it's not known if the footage still exists, although today you can read the drafts of the movie online. Chrysanthemum for a Bunch of Swine is a 1967 spaghetti western movie about a bandit who kidnaps a beautiful lady. Him and his gang hide out in a monastery where the Sir Bandit tries to convince the priest to try and marry off both himself and his kidnapped bride, although the priest is unprovoked, and when the gang flee, the priest follows on hunting them down. The movie hasn't been known to be shown not since its initial release, with only its soundtrack and a few posters being accessible today. In the mid to late 1910s, there were a trilogy of silent movies that were created based on golem mythology, a golem being a person made out of clay who are used to take commands. However, out of this Golem trilogy, only the last movie still survives. Made in 1920, there are some fragments of footage that do still exist from the first Golem movie made in 1915. However, as for the second film, The Golem and the Dancing Girl, made in 1917, there isn't any known surviving footage and incredibly few surviving photographs from the production. There have been countless rumours over the years that there may be surviving prints of the first two movies. However, the sources have never been verifiable. In the year 2000, Brad Jones made a student film called Cancelled Sitcom. On reflection, he doesn't particularly view the film very highly, although it was fairly well received when it was made amongst his peers, being showed off on a website called iFilm for at least 5 years, although the only copy Mr. Jones has was a DVD master, which that and his DVD collection was stolen, with the whereabouts of the processions still being unknown. Brad Jones has moved on onto online video making, being best well known for his series The Cinema Snob, where he reviews/riffs onto low-graded movies. While Brad Jones doesn't seem to be particularly fazed by the loss of Cancelled Sitcom, his followers are still rather curious to see on what it was like. Nobody Ordered Love is a British drama film that was made back in 1972 about a fictional director called Paul Medray having an abysmal time trying to make his World War film epic, with the first main actress committing suicide and the second one being assaulted to get her role. The film comes to its climax where Medray destroys the film prints out of spite and revenge to the higher-ups. This film was the brainchild of Harvard David, who wanted to capture the real-life nightmares that can happen on set while making a movie. When it was released, the movie only had a very small run in theatres and wasn't very well critically appraised. In director Davidson's will, he requested for all prints of the film to be destroyed, and by consequence, a print hasn't turned up in years. The movie is currently on the BFI's top 70 most sought after films. The Four Devils was a 1928 Fox movie about a circus clown who takes in 4 orphans to raise. In their adult life, they become acrobats called the Four Devils, where 2 of them, Charles and Marion, become romantically involved with one another. However, soon another lady comes into the picture, capturing the attention of Charles, which may very well compromise his relationship with Marion. When it was released, there were 2 different versions of the film, one that played as a silent movie, while the other one had sound. Unfortunately, neither version are known to exist anymore. In the 1930s, Italy were creating an animated feature of Pinocchio, where if it was fully completed and released as planned, then it would have made it the fully first cel animated movie, predating Walt Disney's Snow White. However, there weren't enough artists within the country that had the necessary skills for cel animation, so a lot of the production time was spent to try and train the animators up. Eventually, the company ran out of money and couldn't complete the film. there's been numerous rumours of what exactly happened to the completed animation, that producers were going to try and reformat the project to complete it, either remaking it as a colour film or just making it into a short film, or even that Walt Disney brought up the negatives to stomp out competition, although that last one certainly seems the most far-fetched. Either way, there's been no updates about the production not since 1940, and the closest that you can experience the film today is via a surviving script. In 1931, animator Bob Clampett approached Edgar Wright to inquire to make an adaptation of his book The Princess of Mars, but as a way to create more spectacular visuals was to turn it into an animated feature. Edgar Wright Burroughs loved the idea, so began a meticulous process to make it into a whole franchise, taking the character from the book John Corman and would put him into an episodic series that would then lead to a feature film that would now have a mostly original plot. Tess Animation was completed in 1936, however when distributor MGM showed it around, they struggled to drum up very little excitement, and thus presumed that American viewers were not ready for a sci-fi story on a big scale. If the proposed animated movie did went on ahead, then it might have just very well predated Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, as the very first fully American animated feature. For years, the assets of the unrealised projects were presumed to be missing, but some of the Tess animation did resurface during the 1970s. But as for the original script and the completely unique storyline, it has sadly become lost over time. In 1919, the first adaptation of the novel Anne of Green Gables was made. It mainly stuck quite faithful to the original story, although it did take some creative elements, like Anne being an American girl rather than being from Canada like in the original book. Original author Montgomery wasn't particularly flattered by this change. Today, no prints are known to have survived, although the book was reissued to coincide with the film adaptation, containing some still photographs that are not known to exist anywhere else. Dark Streets was a sound crime film that was released in 1929. It's notable for being the first sound movie to feature a double role, meaning when an actor or actress plays more than one role. Today, it remains to be seen if there are any known prints of the movie that still exist. Big Boss Part 2 was a 1976 sequel to the Bruce Lee film The Big Boss, although with Mr. Lee being deceased for a few years at this point. The film stars other martial artists, like Chan Wei Man and Lo Lee. Following decades on, it's never received a home media release. There was a print that was known to exist by a South African private collector, who uploaded 10 minutes of the film on YouTube. Online fans of Kung Fu Cinema did attempt to see if they could retrieve the print, but it's now owned by Zambian Cinema, who have currently no plans to release the movie. The Children of Loneliness is a 1937 exploitation film about a lady named Bobby who becomes infatuated with her roommate Eleanor. Meanwhile, there's a subplot where, at Eleanor's work, a lady becomes romantically interested with a male artist, who is actually a closeted homosexual. By the end of the story, it doesn't end well with both gay characters, making their lives seem like tragedies that they could never fully fulfill. The film is very much a product of its own time for the way that it treats the subject of homosexuality, and that if it was ever to resurface, it probably wouldn't be the most politically correct film today. At the moment, there are no known prints in any documented archives. Agent 00 is a spy comedy film that was made in the Philippines, with the title character being played by little person Wang Wang, who has earned the distinction of being the shortest person to ever star in an action film. That same year he starred in another James Bond parody, For Your Hire Only, playing the same character. This preceding movie would go on to become a cult classic internationally, but unfortunately its precursor movie is not available to watch. In 1969, animator Nancy Edel would make a short 7-minute film, being a cartoon about supernatural beings going inside and experiencing the enjoyment of a nude woman. The short film was virtually a cheeky movie, and unlike a lot of other cheeky flicks of the internet age, this one isn't readily available. In 1970, Josh Franco began filming a psychological slasher film titled Juliet, where the main lead seducts and seduces her victims, comprising of male men. Tragically, Juliet actress Zoe Miranda died in a car accident when only about 40 minutes of the film was completed. It's rumoured that director Franco held on to the footage, but this has not been confirmed. The Humpty Dumpty Circus was a 1908 short film that would utilise commercially available circus toys that would spring to life. This is believed to be the earliest example of stop-motion animation in film history. Unfortunately, we have either no footage or photographs of the production. The only main concrete thing we have left are just some newspaper reports of the time. The Furies is a lost 1930 melodrama, being about a lady named Thiffy Sands, who's trying to get a divorce from her millionaire unfaithful husband. However, the husband's dirty deeds may go a little bit deeper than just committing adultery. The film is known to exist, however it's within the hands of private collectors. Only time will tell if they will ever let the mass public get to see the film once more. The Dream of Hamish Mose was an unreleased 1969 movie about a group of Civil War Buffalo soldiers on a mission to try and find Hamish Mose, who was meant to be hanged and left for dead. This film is notable as if it was released as planned, then it would have been the directorial debut of Cameron Mitchell, who additionally financed the film, and it would have also been the first on-screen movie appearance of O.J. Simpson in a very small role. After director Mitchell went through a very messy and expensive divorce, he couldn't afford to take the movie any further. The prints to the film exchanged hands several times over the years, and now the current copyright holders do have plans to finally release it once they can find additional financing to clean up and restore the film. Different Seasons was originally a Stephen King novel that was publicised in 1982, being about a young teenage lad named Todd Bowden, where when he finds out that one of his neighbours, a German immigrant, Arthur Denker, is actually a Nazi war criminal hiding from the authorities. Todd threatens to expose his identity if he doesn't share his stories about the Holocaust. Arthur obliges to this. Eventually, this leads Todd down a road where he starts committing horrendous acts. In 1987, filming began for an adaptation of the book, given the new title A Pupil, under the direction of Alan Bridges. However, only 40 minutes worth of footage was ever completed as funding fell through. Stephen King did get to see some version of the film and he was very pleased with it. And there are several rumours that a work print VHS was screened at a couple of conventions between 1987 and 1988. However, the exact whereabouts of the footage are not known. Eventually, another adaptation of the novel was filmed and fully completed in 1998. In 1987, John Henry Timoth achieved a Guinness World Record for making the longest movie ever made, clocking in at 87 hours, with achieving the record being the main motivation for making it so long. The film is titled The Cure to Insomnia, with the film comprising of L.D. Grogan reading a poem that shares the title of the movie, which is about 40,080 pages long. The soundtrack utilises heavy metal, while it implements pornographic imagery. The film never received a wide or home media release, and to date none of the 87 hours of footage can be found anywhere. Carbolic Soap was a 1992 amateur movie that was a parody of the superhero genre. It was directed by 17-year-old Edgar Wright. Aside from the film's poster, nothing further has been released of the movie, although it is known that Edgar Wright did send out several VHS copies, that they may still be circulating out there in the mass market. Kyobi no Kitsun Tutubimaru is a 1968 anime about a young Japanese emperor named Tobimaru who becomes seduced by a kitsune where she corrupts and curses the land. The movie was the brainchild of Nakajima, who struggled to find an investor to make the movie, so to see the project through he invested his own money into it, with some collaborative help with Toei Animation. However, when it came to the distribution, he was only successful enough to get it shown in one cinema. Unsurprisingly, the film failed to recoup its production cost, and had since faded away into obscurity. In 2010, a 16mm print was rediscovered of the movie, and has been privately screened several times since, but there are currently no plans to release it any further. Him was a 1974 cheeky movie about a man who was having erotic fantasies about Jesus having a bit of fun with two other men. It would be 6 years later that the movie would receive more mainstream attention, as it was mentioned in the book The Golden Turkey Awards, winning the most unerotic concept in pornography. On the next page, the author revealed that one of the movies written about in the book was a fake, with people presuming that it may have been the rather obscene Jesus movie. However, it turned out that the fake title was The Dog of Norway, and in subsequent years since, that evidence have turned up that him did indeed exist. However, no footage is currently available to watch for the film. Santo Gold Blood Circus was a 1985 sci-fi wrestling movie about aliens that came down who fought and ate wrestlers. Very interesting, isn't it? The same can be said about the man behind the film, Santo, who ran a business making fake jewellery and had very big ambitions for his film. He tried finding a distributor during the late 1980s, but it never came to anything. It did get a very limited screening in certain places for 1 week only, failing to recoup its $2 million budget. In 2008, the Santo Gold Company had rediscovered the original 35mm negative in their archives. They tried finding a new distributor to get the film out there, but eventually they went on eBay to see if anybody, and I mean if anybody, was interested, with a starting bid of $21 million or a buy it now price for $750 million. So apparently Blood Circus is worth the same amount as the copyright to Spider-Man. Goodness. The film went unsold, however, and to date it still can't be seen in full. Bolgosuri was South Korea's first sci-fi monster movie, also the first film of the country to extensively utilise special effects. Prior to its release, the most popular movies in the country were historical dramas, and despite Bolgosuri being set within the medieval period of South Korea, this had seemingly done little to persuade critics that this was a film of greater quality than it was. In fact, just like a lot of B-movies from America, this one was viewed as pure trash. Still though, this shouldn't be glossed over, as it was the first for its kind of South Korea's movies. However, after the Korean War, the prints of the film have gone missing, with the only remnants left being promotional material. Convention City was a Warner Bros. 1933 comedy, where the humour was very unreserved, and may have been a little too cheeky for its own good for when it was released. Featuring full frontal nudity, the movie ended up getting censored or outright banned in certain territories. Because the film was so immensely controversial upon its release, not many people took much care into preserving the prints of the film. A copy was still known to be shown as recent as 1942, but today the only way to experience the film in some capacity is by reading the original script. Andy Mulligan made a movie career out of creating softcore drama films. He made quite a few, but Filthy 5 is considered to be perhaps the ultimate best one of the batch. with Andy Warhol stating that it was one of his personal favourite films. Sadly, when distributor William Miskin's company changed over in control to his son Lou, he melted down the prince to the sexploitation films, as he felt that after the boom of the porn industry that they had no further commercial value. Thus, as a casualty, the Filthy Five and similar films to it in the film vault sadly didn't survive. Big Bugman was going to be a 2D animated movie that would have starred Brendan Fraser, playing Howard Kind, who becomes a superhero known as Big Bugman. However, he soon becomes corrupt with the business side of things. The film was quite well known for being Marlon Brando's final movie, playing the elderly lady, Mrs. Sour. This role actually fulfilled a dream for him, as he's always had aspirations of playing a lady. The plan was to release the film in 2006, it got delayed to 2007 and then to 2008, and there were no further updates ever given about the production. Broadway Brawler was an unfinished hockey movie that starred Mauro Tierney and Bruce Willis. After 20 days of principal photography, Bruce Willis was unsatisfied with the director, Lee Grant. Thus it was planned to hold production until they could find a suitable replacement director. However, this never happened, and the cost that was spent between $15 and $17 million had gone to waste. Bruce Willis ended up getting into some legal complications with the Walt Disney Corporation. To alleviate this, Willis agreed to be within a free picture contract with the company, which led him to star in Armageddon, The Sixth Sense, and The Kid. To date, nothing of Broadway Brawler has ever been released. Conversations with Vincent was a working title of a Tim Burton documentary, where, during the shooting of Edward Scissorhands, Burton proposed the idea to Vincent to make a documentary about his life and career. Filming started not too long afterwards, although production was on and off due to Burton's other commitments. The project seemed to be within a state of disrepair when Vincent passed away in 1993, although the following year Burton was back on board the project, giving it the new title A Visit with Vincent. However, close to 30 years later, no documentary ever materialised. Some have speculated that the documentary may have been too personal for Tim Burton to release. However, this has never been confirmed. If you're a cowboy lover, then John Wayne shouldn't be a stranger to that very film genre. However, a film he starred in, The Oregon Trail, released in 1936 when John Wayne would have been well established as an actor, has mysteriously gone missing. There have been exhausted searches to find the movie in the 21st century, but those attempts have turned up nothing. It's one of the very few lost John Wayne films, and is considered to be a holy grail for the Western genre. King Kong Appears in Iro was a low-budget 1938 silent Japanese movie that was made to coincide with the re-release of the original 1933 King Kong film. Despite being named King Kong on the poster, it's believed that the hairy monster was never directly called King Kong in the film, and that Kong was merely used just for the advertisement. Although the Japanese production company likely didn't acquire the blessing from RKO, who would have owned the copyright to King Kong at the time. Sadly, since the movie no longer exists, the exact finer details of the plot are a little bit murky, such as it's been highly speculated that the ape in the movie would have had the ability to change sizes. Although this is never acknowledged or referred to on any of the surviving promotional material, and outside of the poster it appears that the hairy creature is just more or less a bit taller than the average human. Although Mr. Kamiyama, who would star in the movie as the Kong monster, and would later be the original Godzilla, said in a 1988 interview that he played a giant gorilla in the film, although doesn't elaborate of the creature having the ability of changing size. Until the day either a script or any of the film cans ever turn up, we will never know for certain. The Cat Creeps is a 1930 sound horror movie, which was a remake of the 1927 film by the same name, and then it would be remade once more in 1946, although having a completely different storyline. The movie was produced under Universal, who would become quite famous throughout the 30s and 40s for creating a popular series of horror films. In fact, just 1 year after the Cat Creeps movie, the most important film of the horror genre, Bela Lugosi's Dracula, would be released. Sadly, this penultimate movie before Universal got wrapped up in their horror cycle is missing from their archives. Although in the 1932 short comedy Boo, which comprises of stock clips from other horror movies, actually uses footage from the Cat Creeps. Added up, there's about 1 minute and 43 seconds of the film that still exists today. Batman Fights Dracula was an unauthorized movie, where the plot is pretty much explained through the title. The film was made within the Philippines and received a release in the country in 1967, and while promotional material has resurfaced on the internet, the actual whereabouts of the cans of films are not known. Currently, Batman Fights Dracula is redeemed to be one of those sought after lost movies of the Asian region. In 1964, production began on Tarzan and the Jewels of Opera, based on the 5th book of the Tarzan series that shares the same name, being about Tarzan trying to obtain the lost treasures of Atlantis. This film was going to star American Olympian Don Bragg, which Tarzan always just happened to be his dream role. He was quite well known for imitating the famous Tarzan call during his games. However, the producers didn't seek permission from Edgar Rice Burroughs' estate, so when news spread of an unauthorized Tarzan movie was in the works, the production received a cease and desist to shut down, which they did, and the movie was never completed. As of 2023, no photographs or footage has ever been released of the cancelled production, presuming if they still exist. And since these circumstances happened over 50 years ago, we sadly don't have the luxury of speaking to many people left that would have been alive during production, such as the star of the film, Don Bragg, who passed away in 2019. Between 1966 and 1969, Orson Welles was in production of a movie called The Deep, about a newlywed couple stumbling upon an abandoned boat. On board is a man who's got quite a remarkable story. Welles not only directed, but he acted and produced the film. Unfortunately, he kept on fluctuating on running low on funds, and by the time filming ended, some significant scenes still didn't ended up getting filmed. Work prints are known to exist of what was shot, but aside snippets from a trailer, the film has still widely remained to have been unseen by the public. Released back in 1921 theatrically around Europe is Dracula's Death, the oldest known Dracula movie ever made, with the story reported to be about a lady named Mary who is locked up in an insane asylum who's having nightmares about Dracula, who eventually kidnaps her and takes her back to his fortress, where Mary is placed within an elaborate wedding. 2 years later, the movie was re-released and portions of it was reshot with a new actress. Unfortunately, by the 21st century, it doesn't seem like either version have survived. The only elements that have survived is a novelization based off the film, and several very grainy photographs, some of them being in a worse state than others. The Primevals was a pet project by animator David Allen, who pitched the concept all the way back in the late 1960s to Hammer Studios, although the film wouldn't truly get its footing not until the early 1990s under the wing of Full Moon Productions, who at this point were reaching their peak in financial revenue, with the Primevals being their most expensive movie to date. All of the live action filming was fully completed, and it was planned to spend an additional year to fully do the stop motion. However, due to financial strain, production came to a crawl, but David Allen was still leading the boat, up until his untimely death in 1999. Because of this, Full Moon Productions had to shelve the project. until by 2018 they launched the project on Indiegogo to raise the finances to complete the animation. The idea is to finish up enough of the movie where it's at least releasable, but then releasing an extended cut that would include some animatics that would feature scenes that were just a little bit too out of the budget range for Full Moon Productions in this modern day and age. It was set for a release in 2022, however the movie has still not been publicised as of yet. In 1917, Fox Studios produced one of the most elaborate and expensive silent films of its time, Cleopatra, starring Cleopatra as the title role, who was a well-regarded actress starring in dozens and dozens of movies, but sadly today, only 4 of which still survive. Her most well-known film, Cleopatra, are not amongst them. The film was known to exist as recent as 1958 at the Museum of Modern Arts in New York. Sadly, the vault that was containing the footage came up in flames. Today, the film isn't known to exist, although there is about 20 seconds worth of moving footage, and there are still a great variety of many different stills of the production. At the age of 17, in respect to his age, Spielberg made a very ambitious film at the length of 135 minutes, a movie sci-fi titled Firelight, which Spielberg would later attribute of being an inspiration for Close Encounters. Spielberg spent about $500 making the film, and was able to get it shown at his local movie theatre, showing it to 500 people, each paying $1 for a ticket. Although someone was kind enough to pay double, bringing the profits to a grand total of $1. With the budget being exceedingly low, the aliens only appear via shadow near to the end of the film. While Spielberg was looking for work in Los Angeles, he lent 2 of the film reels to a producer, which 1 week later his production company went under and the reels were never returned to Spielberg. Today, only some segments of the film are known to exist, and even still, not all of the clips have been made available to the public. The first film adaptation of the Wizard of Oz books was in 1908. Original Oz author L. Frank Baum was very involved with the production. It was a multimedia project. The plot would start out live on stage with Dorothy being whisked away to the land of Oz, which all of it would have been pre-filmed and projected for the auditorium. The film material went through a very expensive process, where each frame was hand-painted to add colour. While the production was immensely successful, the cost was so high to maintain it that there was no realistic way that they were going to seek back a profit. Thus the show eventually came to its end. The film material was reshown during late 1925. The only known film copies were within the Baum estate. When they reassessed the condition of the cans, the film had fallen into a ray of disrepair, thus the substance was disposed of, and no additional copies have turned up since. In 1972, Bruce Lee began filming Game of Death, which he both starred and directed in. He completed an estimated 40 minutes of the movie. However, the following year, Bruce Lee had passed away, without ever filming the beginning and ending, leaving it as an incomplete film. In 1978, director Robert Clouse attempted to complete the film. He only utilised a small fraction of the original Bruce Lee footage, and made a completely new storyline. This version wasn't well received by critics. It wouldn't be until 20 years later that more of the original footage would finally be unearthed, edited together as an approximation of what the film may have been. It's speculated by fans that there may be even more footage that hasn't yet been released. The Day the Clown Cried is set in Nazi Germany, where washed-up clown actor Helmut Dort finds himself imprisoned in a concentration camp. There he comes across a group of Jewish children who enjoy his antics. Things do come ahead, however, when he's put in a rather difficult situation, for when he's forced to take the children to their final place. Helmut Dort prays for a last-minute miracle as they all head off to the gas chambers, which sadly doesn't come. The movie was considered to be one of the earliest films to deal with the topic of the concentration camp. However, a complication arose. The film was based on a script by O'Brien, which the producers had failed to seek the rights to. Then, once filming had concluded, they tried to resolve the rights issue, but O'Brien didn't approve on the final film, deeming that it deviated too much from the original script. So by consequence, the film never garnered a release, and as of 2023 is still mainly inaccessible to the public. In 1965 and 1966, there were two movies based off the first two Doctor Who Dalek serials, Doctor Who and the Daleks, and the Daleks' Invasion of Earth of 2150 AD. The movies don't follow the continuity of the show, and are very much within their own world canon. The movies came about thanks to film producer Sisbosky, who acquired a license from the BBC and Terry Nation. The idealised plan was to make a new Doctor Who movie every year, although the concept had dissipated by the release of the second film. Whovians have often fantasised that the third Doctor Who movie would have been an adaptation of the third Dalek serial, The Chase, where the Daleks create their own time machine like the TARDIS and chases the Doctor and his crew throughout time and space. Although, 15 years later after an invasion of Earth, Sisbosky wrote a script titled Doctor Who's Greatest Adventure, where the plot featured two doctors battling against giant crabs. This was actually a rewritten draft of an unproduced film titled Night of the Crabs. Sisbosky lightly rewrote it with the Doctors, as an easier way to find investors for the film by tying it up to a pre-established franchise. He did attempt to seek approval from the BBC, who weren't overly keen over the draft. Although, during the 80s, a fan by the name of Julian Vince took on a very ambitious project, where he made his own version of the third Doctor Who movie, titled The Mission of Doom, making it during his education days, where he was certainly limited with money and couldn't exactly go too big with the project. So in order to compensate for this, he would film all the shots with the Daleks in a miniature format, and then film the live action actors separately. While it was widely talked about in the fan circuit at the time, the project never got completed, and it's unclear as to how much of the film did actually get shot. Clips from the fan film were shown in several Doctor Who documentaries, such as Dalek Mania, and Before Wartime, a retrospective on Doctor Who fan films of the 70s and 80s. During the 2010s, Julian Vince had lost his family home and was homeless for a brief time, and hasn't made too many public appearances during this time frame, and his online presence hasn't been active in years. As it stands, it's not known if he still has any of his former possessions before he had to evade his house, so the fate of the unseen Mission of Doom footage is still unknown. Set for a release in late 2022 as a HBO exclusive was the movie Batgirl, with a production budget of $90 million, and was planned to be part of the DC multiverse, featuring Michael Keaton reprising his role as Batman, which, if the movie was released as planned, it would have been the first time he returned as Batman since, well, Batman Returns. Although, just as filming concluded, the business merger between Warner Bros. And Discovery led to some financial debt by consequence, so as an attempt to try and appeal tax write-off, a number of unreleased projects ended up getting cancelled, and Batgirl was sadly one of these. Now, before we go on, I just want to give a special shout out to the cosplayer, sketchflux, who's been nicknamed the Batgirl of Glasgow. Anyway, she's reached out to an individual who was actually an extra on set. He was sneaky enough to take some pics while he was there, and through a back and forth conversation, they've both kind of assessed as to what the story may be. Precaution, take this with a grain of salt, as some of it is based on speculation. The film would have adapted the comic book Batgirl Year One, and would have featured the villains Killer Moth, Tony Brezzi, and Firefly, played by Brendan Fraser, who would have been the main antagonists. And just like Batman Returns, it would have been set during the Christmas season. Batman would have handed over his secret lair in the cave to Batgirl, and a romance between her and Jason Bard. The extra was able to just capture it via a grainy video.
They just kissed.
Anyway, as of 2023, the movie doesn't look set to see the light of day as of yet. London After Midnight, easily the most well-known movie title in the lost media community. The story's about the death of Roger Belfour, where he's found with a suicide note, but it's believed that his death may have been caused by murder. Professor Edward Burke, played by the legendary Lon Chaney of A Man with a Thousand Faces, is sent to investigate the mystery, although years pass with the case being unsolved. And now Belfour's mansion, being in a state of disrepair, is currently occupied by some mysterious vampires. Professor Burke reopens the case to suss out exactly what's going on, but this may all be an elaborate complication to draw out the real murderer. Minor spoiler warning, it's Professor Burke that's in the vampire disguise. The film's fame of being a lost classic has only recently been re-evaluated as such, as when it was released all the way back in 1927, it wasn't really deemed to be anything particularly special. The film did financially well, but the reviews were rather mixed, describing the story to be rather convoluted. The film was believed to exist as recently as 1965, as the only known film prints were destroyed in a vault fire that same year. During the 50s and 60s, other Chaney films did see some form of re-showings, either in the theatres or on the television. Despite London After Midnight still existing at this point, it didn't gain the same platform of re-showings like other existing Chaney movies, so it was certainly the less favoured out of the canon. So how come it's so desired now? And the simple answer is because it doesn't exist anymore. Its inaccessibility and mystiqueness has only made it more desirable. It's the legends that have been built up around it, very much like Lon Chaney the actor himself. It's mainly horror fans that are into his work. And true, he did star in several horrors, but it's a bit of a misconception to call Lon Chaney a horror actor, as the genre doesn't necessarily dominate his film list. It's just those horror titles have now become so infamously famous. I would go as far as to say that London After Midnight isn't just the holy grail of missing media, but it's now become a bit of a Bigfoot legend within the community. Every year there's always some kind of story on how it may still exist, claiming that a private collector has it or it's been privately screened, with little to no basis in fact to back it up. It's made the film even more bigger than it would have ever been if it still did survive. So I've always wondered, if we ever do rediscover a print, will it be reacclaimed as a lost classic? Or will it still ring true with what the critics said all those years ago, that it's bloody convoluted? Until it's found, we'll never know, because hey, you can't review something that you haven't seen.